not a lot of homework, but a lot to consider. And yeah, on that note, we should talk. I think probably the lead story, which is Blood and Guts, which took place on Wednesday night. First up, the rating, as Blood and Guts did do pretty. Did make a bit of a difference to the number, 953,000 viewers, 441,000, a 0.34 in the 1849, which is the highest mark amongst, according to our friends Brandon Thurston via Post Wrestling. It's the largest since March the 22nd and up 16% on the week before. Big increase in 1849 as well. Found it interesting to see, from the notes we've got there about the demos, that there was a 31% increase in women. Because women don't like blood, JP. I feel like that's a thing that maybe gets wound up sometimes, that Meltzer will offer and repeat, going head to head with those kind of opinions. But yeah, that was the viewership. We'll get into the quarter hours, JP. But before we do, I mean, what did you make of as a show? Blood and Guts, the big after all the big build up, and after maybe learning a bit of a lesson from our friends over at Collision, maybe they realized that a big 1 hour match is maybe the way to go. What did you make of the use of time? And I was going to say Dynamite as a whole, but this is 50% of the show. I think was the
50% of the show. It sounds weird. Very rarely do I find myself, I'm not saying agreeing with Dave Meltzer, but I was reading a bit of The Observer today, and I did think no, not about that. Christ, no.
Have I walked into a Ricky Gervais
again? No, you bloody hell. It was basically, I liked the match, and then it became very kind of gimmicky and convoluted, I thought, towards the end, personally. That's what I thought. Not that it was a bad piece of TV. I just probably wasn't as excited for this as well. It was one of my kind of takeaway, just because, various people not being there for injuries and the storyline kind of being overdone. And it delivered what I kind of expected. I think it was a better version. It might have been the best version of what they've done, really, in some ways. But it's not something I'm necessarily enthusiastic about, because it feels like, I just couldn't go particularly berserk over it. I thought it was, I suppose, I'm giving it a rating. I'd probably go like 3.5. Which sounds like ridiculous. It just wasn't this. I find the spectacle side of it is like I've kind of gone past that as much as anything else. Gimmicked nails on beds and stuff like that. I did think of the banned move list and the rest of it, and I thought, well, is that coming into effect from like the 20th rather than the 19th? They're not having that there.
You always knew that the second they announced that match, if it wasn't going to be Roosh, it was going to be John Moxley was going to be try to break all those rules.
Oh yeah.
Connor says here, as far as the format goes, it was spot on, but the match part of it went a bit wrong. I can kind of see that take on it. I came out of it wondering, a blood and guts / war games match is just not really for me in 2033. Because as to say to the chat there, I think Meltzer went high on it, 4.75. Alistair says there, if that's the verified number, then bloody hell. I think for me, it's just, there was enough in there for me to enjoy, is probably what I'd say. There were fun, good spots in there. The one pack dig swinging off the top of the cage, I very much enjoyed. I enjoyed
the foot stomp through the table onto one of the jacks.
Yeah,
that
the double foot stomp through the middle. Yeah. That was really good. Camera missed it first time, but we got it second time on the replay. There's a lot of stuff like that on this show. So there were memorable spots in there. And I think it was overall formatted quite well. There's a lot of I don't know. It feels like, the people who make fun of Roman Reigns, Laura, would make fun of a Matty. I feel like those same people are doing that with the finish to the match. Like it's fucking Shakespeare or something like that. The fact that, yes, it's cool that they told the story of the babyfaces stuck together. The heel team fell apart because they were a group of mercenaries. It's not high art. I think anyone watching it got that. You know what I mean? It's not that. It doesn't. I don't think it deserves the level of plaudits I've maybe seen it getting in some circles. Because the negative of that is, well, at the end of the day, the 5 babyfaces just eliminated the 3 remaining heels in quite brutal fashion. But as a whole, I just don't know. Is it just because I'm I'm not a hardline Brexit to JP, but I am a hardline shut cage fucking door. I think for me, that's a massive thing for me. Whereas, instead of this being a War Games type match where literally the violence takes place in the cage, of course we had to open the door again. or and in this case, it was even worse for me, to be honest, because like they didn't do the big crash bump, which I'm happy about. But then it was like, was it really worth getting the lads out of the cage so that Matt Jackson can do his stupid Northern Light suplex spot? Was it really worth it to do the dropping the pins through the top of the cage spot? Just keep them in the fucking cage. Or like when Pac did the whole thing with the the bolt cutters to get himself out that he conveniently knew were under the ring. It's like, is it that hard to just shut the fucking door and lock it? So like that is an immediate negative for me. The West Side Story spot is a negative to me, as Andy said. But like I say, I've got real mixed feelings. I don't think 3.5 is an unreasonable rating, because it's like I can name a load of things I really enjoyed. I can name a load of things that kind of irked me. And like I say, the overall story I think made sense to me, but even that got rushed a bit. That felt like towards the end of the match, it was like, okay, we had an hour worth of TV time. The two heels leaving the cage felt like there'd then be like, a couple of minutes at least to tell that story of it's 5-on-3 now and the heels are going to capitulate. But it felt like they rushed really quickly to the finish, to the point where the camera didn't catch Moxley tapping out on behalf of Wheeler Yuta, and it just felt a little bit underwhelming in the end,
Yeah, it did. And it's funny because I've kind of been underwhelmed by all of them now. By the three they've done now at this stage.
That's why I'm thinking, is it just not for me at this point? Like, maybe there isn't a 2023 War Games match that works for me. Maybe there isn't one someone can do.
I think there can be if it's kept simple. And I think, the idea of keeping it in the cage, for example. So if the one spot was Don Callis doing a Medusa, climbing on top of the cage in order to drop like a weapon into it, that in and of itself, no one has to attack him or anything else, but just that spectacle would probably be as spectacular as anything they would have, because otherwise they're just going outside for shits and giggles. And and this is the thing. If I'm not into the story and I've been underwhelmed by the matches, I'm not going to love it. Conceptually, the idea of a match like this and a long match that tells a story over an hour, as we go into the rating stuff, I think that's interesting, because we've seen them do it twice in a week with similar kind of results. And it says a lot about why you can't do it every week, that there is a place for these kind of epic, grandiose matches and things like that. That actually, I was thinking about that Royal Rampage on Rampage. I was just like, that should have just gone an hour. That should have been the show. Just would have been interesting to see them do something along those lines as well. But it's not for me. And I think maybe it would be for me if I was really bang into the feud. And I think for the other ones, I've probably been more into the feuds and then been disappointed by the whatever ridiculous spot they do at the end.
Yeah, I think for me, like a big part of me. So the West Side Story spot you was asking there is when they do the whole 5 versus 5, it breaks down and like they're all staring at each other from each side of the ring. It's become just a thing you do in those matches, hasn't it? Unfortunately, I think the other thing when you talk about being underwhelmed, Kota Ibushi, you got to talk about him. Like, was that definitely Kota Ibushi? I don't think you can talk about one without the other, because I've seen it referred to as like body shaming or whatever. And like, I've got to say at the start, if I look like Kota Ibushi, I'll be fucking made up. You know what I mean? I'm still blaming the pandemic from a couple of years ago for putting a few pounds on, like I'm still using that as an excuse. So like, if Kota Ibushi, as Jamesy said, wants to eat some chip butties at home and have a nice life, good for him. But I don't think you can talk about one without the other, because I think Kota Ibushi, him being sculpted like a fucking god is part of what Kota Ibushi is. So it was shocking when he walked out and wasn't quite in the perfect shape he usually is. He was like, I don't know, let's say he was 70% of the way there. That's still shocking if you're Kota Ibushi. But I don't think it'd be a talking point if he didn't look shit in the match. He looked awful. And again, that might be expectations too. That, he's still, Kota Ibushi has got expectations up here. And he got in there and he just looked off the pace. He was slow. Most of the things he hit in the match just felt just that little bit off, or that half a second late, which you don't get from Kota Ibushi. In generally, I'd be questioning whether he should have even been in the match. Now, I think I'd be more critical of that if he was their first idea. It feels like from the Tony Khan conference call last week, Eddie Kingston was option one. And then obviously the G1 thing happened, and they had to come up with a fifth man, and who better than the other member of the so-called Golden Elite, and got a lot of people excited. So I understand the logic, but he didn't really fit, because like even when he came out, he's just sauntering out being Kota Ibushi, and we all know what he's like. That's kind of what you expect from him. But it didn't really suit the pace of this violent match, and he just was wandering around the cage looking like a bit of a lost puppy for me for the majority of like the match. And you know, like I say, a couple of spots went wrong, not massively wrong, just off. And I feel like he contributed a little bit to like maybe my underwhelming feeling coming out of the match. Like I'm 3.5 isn't me saying it was the worst match I've ever seen, but it was just that notch lower, I think, because most of his offense looked a bit shit. And after the big build up of this is Kota Ibushi coming into AEW, didn't feel like it was Kota Ibushi walking into AEW.
Do you know what? This is possibly the worst thing. Towards the end, I forgot he was even there. Like at points, I just forgot it, and he was just like, "This was meant to be the big kind of build up." And you know, he did get the big pop from the crowd and things like that when he was announced. He came out, and then he just, like you say, just really like underwhelming. Which the whole idea of why people go bonkers about him is he was very much a trailblazer and like doing things his own way and everything else. I just don't know if that's not the attitude that's really needed at this point in time, probably just in terms of that overall direction. My fear is as well, and this is probably the other thing when I think about him coming in, are we going to end up replaying stories that we've seen in New Japan like 5-6 years ago? Because that's where I fear that this is where we're going to end up. We're going to end up with Kenny in a tag team doing Golden Lovers stuff, and I could give less of a shit about that in 2023. But yeah, it just...
It's funny.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was to that point. Sorry, before we move on from it, like I think links to something else in the show. I was looking at Jungle Boy, you know, in his segment, and we're going to talk unconvincing. We'll talk him, but there was one moment in that match where he did convince me, and it was the little smirk at the end when he was making the pin. And just something popped into me. I was like, "Oh, don't you think he'd be good with like the imagine?" I don't think he's going to really work on his own right now, but imagine they put him with the Young Bucks, you know, the shit here. The shitty heel. If you really want to push him as a main event act, wouldn't that be cool? They could probably fit that. I think they could fit with like that douchebag thing. And the next thought in my head was, nah, Young Bucks only want to work with the mates. That'd mean they can't play with Kenny and Hangman. So they probably won't do that. Like, you know, that's those lads all up and down, isn't it? Because you're probably right. There probably is that coming with Kenny and Kota Ibushi, but. Yeah, I don't know. I reckon there's other podcasts out there you can find that will be giving that near 5 stars. Like I say, Dave Meltzer is one, but there's just a number of reasons there that it just didn't really land for me. And like I said, Kota Ibushi was chief among them, and some of the cutesy stuff was chief among it as well. But I think we're designed that way, JP. I don't think we're colliders, JP, through and through. You know, there was that CM Punk story this week that apparently held a big locker room meeting and talked about how the people who usually hate Dynamite seem to be loving Collision. Definitely not a listener to the Jim Cornette Experience. Not at all. Is our CM Punk? Maybe we fit in that category too. Maybe that's that too. You know.
Although in theory, the structure of Dynamite is something that we should have loved, even if like some of the stuff they put in, I still think there's the whole quality control stuff as we get into MJF and Adam Cole going to a Chinese restaurant.
Like, you can go to that next if you want. Go on.
Yeah, fucking hell. I mean, it's world champion, and if neither of them had belts, like we have said before, and this was like a mid card. Like kind of feud / pairing for a bit, I could kind of see it. And for a live audience, they love that double clothesline stuff. But the amount you're having to put like to the side as well, particularly, you know, given that he screwed over Sammy Guevara very recently as well. It just like, I don't know. I don't like this storyline. If we're getting this at All In, this might be my piss break match. I might sit through everything else up to that and then just go, I'm off for a drink, whatever. Just, I'm not into it. Not into it in the slightest. When they're doing dance-offs in the ring, and so, why the fuck is that on TV? Sorry. Like, it's one thing for Garcia, who's trying to develop a character necessarily, but I'm just like, world title feud. And you do the comparison, and this is like with my Matty head on. Roman Reigns, how he behaves as a world champion, and how MJF behaves. and it's two. You speak a lot about like instincts that wrestlers have for what's good and what's bad. Why the fuck are they just going, no, like being uneasy kind of friends? You don't have to go straight to skits. There are other things you can do. There's things called subtlety, for example, which this just doesn't have, like, at all. I can't fucking stand it. I won't lie. I didn't want them to win it. I kind of thought I like the idea of Garcia and Guevara as a team, like I said last week before, but yeah, I fucking hate this storyline.
I don't know. I think the counter is, it came out today in the Observer that, you know, the Adam Cole and MJF t-shirt is the top seller right now in AEW. When we took the quarter hour ratings, the quarter hours for it are pretty strong. You know, you look at that pattern across the show as a whole. They look pretty good. It was the highlight last week was the in-ring. I made the joke. Obviously, the backstage segment was the low one on that. I kind of feel like it's just one of those, JP, where it's like, do we have to just admit it works, but it's not for us? Because I thought, if I'm honest, I did, and I said this in the Discord. I didn't want to admit to it, but I did have a couple of chuckles at the Chinese restaurant bit. Maybe it's just the fact that, you know, Americans think Kung Po chicken's spicy. Maybe that's the bit that got me. But I kind of laughed at that. And then the in-ring stuff, like, it was a match of two halves. I think the nonsense with the dancing and all of that did have me thinking of CM Punk's comments about Collision, and thinking, yeah, this is definitely not the show for me. But the more I see like live reports coming in about it and stuff, and you see people who were in the building, like our friend Andrew Rich was there, and he was saying how like everybody in the building was kind of going wild for it. I go on Twitter and it feels like half of the people there, probably because I got a well curated timeline, are people like us who just are mostly enjoying it. But then there's another 50% who like, also that seems like the 50% who love Roman Reigns and love the bloodline stuff, also think like this is the best thing in wrestling. But again, if you look at the quarter hours, you look at the t-shirt sales, all of that stuff, is that the argument that maybe they're onto something there, playing devil's advocate?
I think ultimately it's this is where we sit there with, and this is where I am with quite large swathes of, I suppose, wrestling at times where it isn't necessarily for me, but I understand why it works. I think ultimately, though, what you do is your world champion is kind of like almost how, or your top star on the show is sort of how you should like perceive the show to be. And it makes me just think Dynamite is very, very silly. And Collision is a lot more serious because that's just the nature of the people who are on that. And the silliness just isn't for me. And this was kind of full of silliness. Don't get me wrong, when the four of them started like actually wrestling in the match and stuff like that, I enjoyed that aspect. And said half an hour draw between Adam Cole and MJF the other week. Adam Cole's best match there as well. There is things where he's better suited to this kind of environment. I'm just thinking that this is where your world title ends up being lost to other stuff. And that's really where this is. It's filler, really, for the blood and guts stuff. The blood and guts stuff is the real main, is you know, those people are the real main eventers, is how it comes across to me. Whereas this is like a junior storyline as well. Yeah. So I don't know. I think they're all wrong.
That's generally how you pull me back round. It is like, you know, the other Ewan makes the point here in the chat. Like, you pull me back round then when it's like, right, but this is for the world title, you know. Yeah. But like I say, I can't help but look at that pattern of rating for Dynamite this week and think it held steady pretty much the entire show. And I think all the lesser stuff in the undercard probably wouldn't have done that. So I don't know. I think you've got to take that into account. But yeah, there's it's one of them. I'm 50-50 and I'm not fully being pulled around. And that's the thing, you know, like Alistair says here, you know, there's a choice for us now as colliders, and we've been forgotten about this week, JP. There's fucking one match announced for Collision we're going to talk about later. But you do get that choice. Do you want PWG BTE or do you want the Bret Hart Reenactment Society, as Alistair puts here? I think I want the Bret Hart Reenactment Society, but you know, I can take a bit of PWG/BTE when it's good. As Andy said, yeah, when they get a big reaction like that off something as simple as a double clothesline, clearly something is working with it. I think we probably just got a chalk on there, not for us category. But I mean, they're the main two things from Dynamite this week. Did you have any quick takes on anything else from the show, JP?
You mentioned about Jungle Boy and possibly that being the best kind of thing about his performance. I mean, other than the music, it just feels like an odd choice. I thought Hook kind of looked all right.
I haven't heard A+ in a good number of years, so it was great to hear him. Oh no, it wasn't him, was it? Sorry, that was a joke for Liam and no one else. Anyway, go on. Sampled the same song.
He sampled that, I'm assuming.
You'll know it. It used to be a rap video. It used to be on MTV all the time. Yeah, sampled Beethoven's Fifth or something like that. Yeah, same sample.
That's Beethoven's Fifth. I mean, that being kind of a way of getting heel reaction and not using, the usual song that he had on there as well. Other than that, though, I mean, it's giving him a title belt, really. I mean, I'd just like him to throw it in the bin, just to do that in the next show, but instead it's like he cared about it. So it was like, oh, they're just giving him a title belt for the sake of it. No, I'm not convinced by this a long way. I think the best thing would be him to just get himself into a reality show and behave like a cunt. How about that? If he did that, that would get him much more in the way of heel heat than I think any of this stuff. But I think this was a hot crowd and they were up for it. So they were going to kind of react to stuff with him anyway. But yeah, I'm obviously not impressed by Jack Perry at all. Like I say, I think, Hook has kind of come quite a long way as well. I think, was there anything else on there other than the Chris Jericho stuff with what looks like
the fuck off, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think in the famous words of Rich Fan, that was a hat on a hat on a hat. The last thing the MJF and Adam Cole nonsense needed was Jericho screaming over it on top as well. But no, I'm with you on Jungle Boy and Hook. I will say I felt like Hook just kind of dwarfed Jungle Boy as far as charisma and presence. You can give the lad new music and give him black leather pants, but like I say, that little moment at the side that gave me a bit of a glimmer of hope. I think Gareth is going to be born out to be
get him Callis
on the Jungle Boy.
As silly as it is, he needs someone desperately, and I don't know. Callis is like the best person I think for that at the moment, and it'd be be a wacky addition, but it'd be like, well, if Callis can't get him to work and get that kind of heel heat, who the fuck can?